Welcome to everyone on this September 28th, 2023 to our town hall. This is our third town hall this year. And I am joined today by Vicky Gardner. There she is. Vicky is the chair of our Open Research Committee. So she's joining us today in that capacity. But of course, Vicky also works in her day job at Taylor & Francis and is a past colleague of mine. So it's really nice to have you with us today, Vicky. In a previous town hall, we presented our other three committees. So the Standards and Technology Committee, the Research Integrity Committee, and the Social Responsibility Committee. There is quite a lot around open research, both in terms of other things we might want to share with you, as well as the committee work. So we saved that for a separate session. And so today, just to share with all of you, I've got a few general announcements and information I'd like to share with you, not least of which some of our upcoming events. Then I'll be handing over the microphone to Vicky, who will share with you the work of the Open Research Committee and what some of the focuses of their activities will be over the next period of time. And then I will round off with some information about some developments in India and Japan. So we're going to focus in on two countries, which I think not everyone has staff on the ground in those countries, and where there have been some developments recently. And so we do want to share the latest on what's happening there with you. So on that, again, welcome. And I'm going to, again, share my screen. So I just need to do that. Give me one moment. It's always that remembering, where was the sharing? Here we go. And I think you're seeing my screen. So let me just begin again, as I said, with a few general announcements. And the first of those is that I do want to congratulate the new and re-elected members to the STM board. So as some of you might know, we've recently had an election and that closed out. And the preferred candidates that the membership have chosen are in the undesignated category. For board seat, we have Miriam Moss, who is from IOP Publishing. We have Eric Merkel-Sabata from Taylor & Francis, and re-elected Sarah Tagan from the American Chemical Society. Sarah has been our vice chair, and if tradition follows, we will likely be seeing Sarah elected to be chair of the STM board at the annual general meeting in Frankfurt coming up here in a few weeks' time. We also have one seat on our board that is reserved for a non-EU, non-US company. Andrew Stammer from Cicero in Australia has previously been in that seat. Some of you might know Andrew is now retiring. I get a little sad thinking about that because Andrew, I know, has been a longtime friend of STM. But we are really pleased to be welcoming a new member to the board, Lei Shi, who is with Tsinghua University Press in China. And I think this is actually the first time that we have had a Chinese publisher on the board. We have had one of our members from Singapore previously, so we have had from that region, but this is our first Chinese publisher on the board. And then finally, Sam Goodchild from Springer Nature has been re-elected as the representative in the early career publisher seat on the board. Sam has been a very active member of the board. He is really active with the Early Career Publishers Committee. And I have to say, congratulations, Sam. It's good to see that you'll be continuing. Our newly elected board members will be ratified. So the election will be ratified at the annual general meeting in Frankfurt on 16th of October. So again, congratulations. I'd also like to share with you, if you're not aware, we have a new member of STM staff, and that is Leela Jones, who is in a brand new role here at STM. She is our new Director of Strategic Programs. And Leela's role is really in being our point person and helping us to drive forward and deliver on our strategy. So in our new strategic areas of activity, so we have standards and technology running through everything, but then we have open research, social responsibility, and research integrity. As you'll hear from Vicky, there are a number of activities and programs that these committees are now identifying and driving forward. And Leela's going to be trying to help us keep all things on track and updating and really thinking about how we're making impact across all of this. So we welcome Leela, who joins us from Taylor & Francis previously, where she was Director of Operational Excellence. One of the many virtues of Leela is that she has a black belt in Lean Six Sigma. And so we're already seeing how helpful and useful that is as she's helping us also with other things around getting organized and structuring some of our work. So if you haven't met Leela, perhaps you'll meet her soon. And then moving on to some of our events, you'll all know, as I mentioned, we've got Frankfurt around the corner, and we certainly are looking forward to welcoming everyone very soon. I also just want to share with you on the morning before the conference, we are having a symposium for a few hours with a contingency from China. And it looks now like we have 28 colleagues from China who will be joining us both at the Frankfurt conference and the day before for this invitation-only symposium. And I really do regret that we had to have a limited number of invites to this. The reason for that, just to explain to everyone, was that we only have 50 seats in that room. And we have, as I just mentioned, 28 guests coming from China. So I only had somewhere between 20 and 25 seats. So we are including a couple of speakers. We invited the board. We've invited the chairs of our committees and a couple other individuals. We do have a waiting list, though. And so thank you for those who reached out and asked if they might be considered. And I do, again, apologize that we can't invite everyone. However, our colleagues from China will be joining us for the dinner as well as during the conference. And among other sessions, if you are joining the session on, sorry, I'm just pulling up so that I can make sure that I share with you correctly. Here we go. Liz Ferguson, who is a member of our board from Wiley, will be chairing a session on how to maintain integrity in a fast-changing and increasingly pressurized world. And in that panel, among others, we will have Professor Li Ying Yang, who is director of the Department for Scientometrics and Research Evaluation at the National Science Library in CAS. I think that was Scientometrics. Suddenly, when I went to read that word, my head was going both between Norwegian and English. I won't try to say it 5 times fast. But anyway, Professor Yang will be joining us. And if you've heard about the China's gray list, the CAS gray list, this is the woman who holds on to that list. And so I think that's why we've invited her to take part in that panel and discuss that. So there'll be plenty of opportunity as well for us to engage with folks from China, ask questions, and share experiences through the rest of the conference. So we look forward to having you, those of you who are going to join us in a few weeks' time. If you're not able to join Frankfurt, and even if you are, I also want to remind everyone we are again going to be hosting STM Week in London in December. This year, between the 5th and 7th of December. On the first day, we're going to have, very similar to last year, an STM Innovations Day, where startups and young companies can come and pitch their innovations for us. This year, we're really focusing in on AI tools and services that are looking to solve issues in the scholarly publishing arena. And so if you know anyone, please tip them and let them know that they ought to be applying. It's a really active day. We've got some lightning talks going on. All of the companies have tables. You can go around and meet. I remember speaking with someone last year who told me, this has been fantastic. I've signed 3 new contracts for services we desperately needed. So it's a really fun day, lots of energy, and I encourage you to think about coming. Also on that day, in collaboration with Karger, Karger will be announcing the Vesalius Innovation Award, which they sponsor, and we're really pleased that we can have them join us on that day for that. We will also, just like last year, be having a Research Integrity Day. And I know that this was particularly appreciated by our colleagues who work in our research integrity departments. As I've said many times, I know they do a really, really tough job. They are often the bearers of bad news. And I think they've appreciated both exchanging information with one another, learning from each other, but equally just being able to kind of pat each other's back and say, hey, you're doing a good job. And yeah, this is really tough work. So part therapy, part information exchange, let's say. And then finally, we're going to have a day focused on sustainability. So our chair, of the Social Responsibility Committee, Rachel Martin, has been working together with our Sarah Phibbs and have really come up with an exciting day where we'll try to bring in some key stakeholders in the UK to look at the responsibilities of publishers and of institutions and funders around sustainable development goals and delivering on those. And we'll be sharing some of the things that publishers have been doing in this space and hearing more about what our other stakeholders have been doing. So do consider joining us if you're in Europe and you're not. And then finally, on events, we are going to be returning to Washington again next year, 23rd to 25th of April. We will also have a Research Integrity Day during this event. I say in a bigger facility, and that is important because those of you who joined us this year will know that we had reached capacity, and then I nonetheless opened the door to 50 additional people. So we did sit in a room packed in like sardines. We had a lot of fun. We were really inspired, but it was really cramped and the air wasn't that great. So anyway, we are going to make sure that we can invite at least as many people as we had in the room last year, plus more. And I'm really pleased to say that Deborah Kahn has agreed to be our conference chair, and she and I will be announcing the theme of the conference very soon and be pulling together a committee to help us plan for that conference. So those were my basic general announcements. So now I would very much like to hand the reins over to Vicky. And that means that I have to remember where here I can actually say that I'm going to give you control here, Vicky. Hang on, there it is.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
You've got control now.
Yes, I do. Marvelous. So I will just repeat what I said in the earlier session today. I think the roster of activities and events that you've outlined, they're timely, they're interesting, they're insightful. So really would encourage everyone listening in to take part in those. And I'd also repeat what I said this morning, which is STM, you're a small team, but you're mighty. I'm always so impressed by all of the work that you're able to do. So hats off to all of you. Anyway, hello again to everybody listening in. As Caroline said, my name is Vicky Gardner, and I'm here in my capacity as chair of STM's Open Research Committee. So in the time that I have today, I'd like to talk to you about who we are, what it is we want to do, why this is important. So this isn't just about open research for the sake of open research. We really do truly believe that this is an important way to help realize the potential of research and help deliver that real world impact and make that difference. I do want to stress that we are a small committee. We're intentionally small because we're focused on doing and we're focused on deciding, and that sort of a small size helps us to work to that aim. That said, we're conscious that we work in service of you as the membership. So we're really keen to hear from you, to get your inputs, your critique and your feedback. So please consider the virtual door open. So I do want to introduce you all to the committee. You can see I've listed on this slide the names of everybody who's involved. So we have the core committee, we also have our board sponsor listed and our early career publisher committee liaison. So I have to personally thank this group because it's always such a pleasure working with them. They're a fantastic group of people. They're really committed and they actively work to support STM's mission to advance open and trusted research on top of their day jobs. So they give up their time and their expertise to do so. So thank you to that group. The committee is tasked by STM's board and its executive to recommend how to best engage and take action on really all of the facets of open research. So this includes, but it's not limited to, open access, which is very familiar to all of you, I'm sure, open data, research culture, open infrastructure, the list goes on. So we do this by meeting monthly as a group, but we also meet regularly outside of that monthly meeting. We have lively group discussions and debates, and we collectively agree on priorities and how best to work to those priorities. The group also includes functional expertise. So all of the folks you can see listed have expertise across legal, policy and advocacy, communications, technology, and editorial. So we think this is vitally important to making progress, and it's proving an effective formula so far. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see that we're saying coming soon is the Open Research Lab. So we are in the process of setting this up and hoping to have our initial meeting by end of the year. This will comprise a wider group of members who the committee will consult with, take views from, and who we hope will be able to support us with horizon scanning. So moving on, what is it that we want to do as a committee? So I've said already, this is about advancing trusted research. And you'll have heard this from Caroline, you'll have heard this from the chairs of the other committees at other town halls as well. So we all work to that singular mission and aim. Our core ambition, specifically thinking as the Open Research Committee, is the second bullet point. So how do we position publishers as an essential partner in achieving open and trusted at scale globally? So let me actually perhaps take a step back. So I've talked to you a little bit about some of the functional aspects and what our objective is as a group, but let's consider the why. So you can see there's an open research perspective in STM's statement at the bottom of the slide. And I will just read this out because I think it's really important to do so. So STM stands for Advancing Open and Trusted Research, where researchers and the rest of society can rely on information that is credible, accessible, linked, and searchable in perpetuity. So for STM, for us, the concepts of openness and trust go hand in hand and are essential in tackling issues that we're dealing with within the research and scholarly communication ecosystem, but also in wider society. I've included a screen grab from an op-ed in the UK Times Higher Education, where Rebecca Lawrence from F1000 is talking about open peer review and how this is key to tackling public health misinformation. And I think that is I completely agree with that sentiment. And I think open research writ large is a real effective tool that we have to combat misinformation and disinformation. So much of the sentiments in the STM statement that I read out chime with those of the UNESCO recommendation on open science. And you can see the infographic on the left-hand side of the slide. I will read out some of these statements because the text is quite small. So UNESCO refers to it as open science. I prefer the term open research as someone with a humanities background, but nonetheless, I think this holds true. So this is defined as an inclusive construct that combines various movements and practices aiming to make multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone, to increase scientific collaborations and sharing of information for the benefits of science and society, and to open the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. Lastly, at the top of the slide, I did also want to call out this great soundbite from last year's report on open access publishing in China, which was co-authored by the China Association for Science and Technology, CAST, and STM. And I love this point that trustworthy science is linked to transparency at all stages of design, execution, and reporting. So those concepts of trust and openness hand in hand, as we saw in the STM statement. So that was some of the theory. We talked about the definitions, but we are seeing real benefits from open access and open research. And I hope that from your constituencies, you would agree with this. I wanted to provide a few very brief illustrative examples, and I'm sure that you will have others as well yourselves. So firstly, thinking about technological impact and the technological benefit of open research, there's a recent study which you can see referenced in the box at the top, which looked at the use of public access content that was linked to a mandate from the US Department of Energy. The paper notes that articles subject to the public access mandate were used on average 42% more in patents. So I know that we have to be cautious about taking too much from this, but certainly we could infer that open or public access content does drive the usage of research in industry, and we can infer some form of technological benefit from making that research openly available. On research impact, Springer Nature published this white paper earlier this year, and this looked at the impact of open access articles in hybrid journals. So hybrid journals being those journals that have both subscription and open access content. They found a clear benefit of open access. So open access articles in those journals were downloaded on average 4 times more by users overall compared to non-open access articles. And the open access articles also attracted, on average, 1.6 times more citations and 2.4 times more altmetric attention. So broader usage, citation, and impact, both within that research and scholarly communication sphere, but also more broadly, as evidenced by that altmetric broader attention. Lastly, on policy impact, we have a really inspiring example here of research published on F1000 F1000's Health Open Research Platform. And this was research on end-of-life care, and it actually has influenced a change to the UK's Health and Care Bill on palliative care. So hopefully the case making done, let me move on to thinking back to the role of the committee and the aspiration that I outlined earlier of positioning publishers as an essential partner in achieving open and trusted at scale globally. So how are we going to do this? On the slide, you can see 3 boxes, and these are the 3 main pillars of exploration that we've created: the open research opportunity, infrastructure for open research, and advocacy. I will say there's lots of areas of intersection here. These aren't standalone pillars, and advocacy is absolutely essential when it comes to the open research opportunity and the infrastructure for open research pillars. But we think it's so crucial that it does deserve to be called out in its own right. And I think this is linked to the first bullet point, which is really key for us at present. So it's building trust in publishers and publications by telling our story our way. Really, advocacy communications are essential in that context. And this is being supported by some of the fantastic resources that STM has already created, but we hope to build on those really great foundations. We're exploring infrastructures for open research with colleagues in STM and with the Standards and Technology Committee. And that's with the aim of defining 21st century foundations for open and trusted at scale. And then lastly, the last point is really more of a philosophical one. We really believe that driving progress and meeting that goal of advancing open and trusted research needs to be done through a process of collaboration and communication across committees, with the wider membership, with other trade bodies, with creative and cultural sector industries more generally, but also with librarians, with funders, and with policymakers. And we do believe that there will be lots of areas of common ground and common purpose that we can articulate and explore. So let me try and briefly cover some of our areas of focus under the 3 pillars that I mentioned earlier. This is a very high-level overview, and it's very brief because of the time we have today, but there will be further updates either at future town halls or in newsletters or both. I do want to say as well that the committee, we've spent time looking at a much longer to-do list and really deliberating quite carefully over that. But I've been keen for us to focus on fewer strategic areas and to dive more deeply into those. So with the STM executive, we prioritise the areas that you can see on this slide, and this is based on a number of factors. It includes whether we might be able to influence these areas as a group, external developments and the pace of change, and the likely time and effort involved in taking action. And this is all coupled with the potential impact or benefit that might arise from taking action in these areas. So top of the list, you can see a point around stakeholder mapping, and this is a work in train with the communications team and the comms forum, but it's really crucial to the successful work of the committee and really speaks to that advocacy pillar that I articulated earlier. So this is about identifying those key audiences that we want to engage with and those audiences that we think we can effectively engage with. And it's really informing our priorities and focus. Now, this stakeholder mapping is something that's being carried out across all of the committees, of course, but we're very, very keen on this from the open research perspective. The next few bullets cover some of the task and finish groups that are already in train. So these are projects that have a specific scope and time frame, as well as specific deliverables. And what I've noted here is details on the member and the STM leads for each of those groups. Big thanks to them, but also huge thanks to 6 to 8 additional individuals who are part of these groups and are giving their time, their expertise, and their ideas to support the development of those projects. The first task and finish group focuses on exploring practical steps to support open access mandates, and this aims to develop a concrete set of talking points and ideas focused around a concept of making open access work. So the group wants to develop these resources to support in constructive dialogue with funders and other policymakers. And this might open up opportunities for webinars or events or other forms of advocacy. The value for money task and finish group is exploring whether we can develop an industry level metric or metrics that will allow us to provide an evidence-based response to some of the anti-publisher rhetoric that I think many of us will have seen doing the rounds, that cites this concept of spiraling costs without actually evidencing that theory. So we want to robustly counter that with a metric that we can hang a narrative and comms around. The rights retention strategies task and finish group is focused on developing a tactical action plan with a series of prioritized activities for STM and members, as well as communication resources to support members in discussions with libraries and others around rights, and perhaps to carry out some myth busting as well when it comes to what authors can and cannot do under current publishing agreements. At the same time, the committee is supporting STM with its engagement globally, and we're working with chapters and other groups to provide that global input and global insight to those local liaisons. There's 3 points listed as being under exploration, and they're not under exploration because they're less important than these other points, but it's more a case of there are some dependencies here on the work of other committees and some supporting activities that will take place. So when it comes to infrastructures for open research, equity and research assessment, these are all areas that we are keen to be focusing on. But as I say, there are some other dependencies and other activities in train. So we will be phasing those slightly and likely to pick those up in earnest next year. So I'm nearly done. I did just want to highlight some fantastic resources that STM's already created. So some of those foundational pieces that I mentioned before. The open access dashboard on the left-hand side is a great tool, and I really recommend that if you haven't already, you visit this and you consider how to deploy this with your communities. An update is coming soon, and we might even reach a tipping point where we have more content available through open access or public access than subscription only, which I think will be a fantastic story for us to tell. On the right-hand side, STM's open access statement has really great foundational resource. And I mentioned, I spoke that, I called out the statement you can see on the slide earlier, because I think this is absolutely essential to our mission and our focus. So there's lots more that we want to do to leverage these resources and to build on them. And it's something that the committee will be working on with the comms and the public affairs forums, with the legal forum, with labs, with the STM executive and board and others over the coming months. And I would just repeat again, we are very keen to have your inputs and your thoughts on that front as well. Which segues nicely into this slide. So we're very keen to make sure that we're representing and serving you as a broader membership, and a few thoughts on this slide as to what you can do to actively take part. So do consider joining the Open Research Lab. Do submit that nomination to your head of house. Do consider joining one of the forums that have been set up. And please just get in touch. As I said, our virtual door is open as a committee. You can see a link on the slide, and that has contact information for all of us. So with that, I think I'll hand back to you. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Vicky. And I don't know if you noticed, we did have a question from Mark Seeley in the chat, which was whether we're suggesting that STM publicly support open peer review, because of course that's not without risks. And also, isn't it true that with respect to OA articles impact, there are other studies, opinions suggesting that impact is not as high as the reports that your note suggests? I don't know whether you want to reply to or address any of those questions whilst we're still in
Yeah.
this section. So go for it.
Thank you, Mark. Great questions. So firstly, open peer review. So the example I put on the slide was illustrative, and it was meant to provoke thought. So I'm pleased that it has done. I think, as you say, we need to look at this in the context of the infrastructures for open research. There are lots of points for, and there are lots of points against that concept. I would signpost the fantastic work of the STM working group on peer review terminology, and I think they've done some really great work to kind of think about not just that concept of open peer review, but just how do we think about and articulate the concepts around peer review in a more open and transparent and inclusive way. So to the extent that open peer review is linked to that concept of openness and transparency, great. In terms of specific initiatives or pilots, I think there is a need to consider that quite carefully. That might be the topic of a future task and finish group. So I don't think it would be appropriate for me to take that call today, but certainly something we would like to explore further. The second point around the open access advantage or disadvantage, I think it's fair to say that there's lots of variation in the literature. The sort of studies that I see generally seem to infer that there is a citation advantage when it comes to people's best research, and I say best in air quotes. So there is this, potential self-selection advantage. But just to share an anecdote with my TNF hat on, in the discussions I have with policymakers and with funders, they certainly do say that removing that subscription paywall is helpful, and it does facilitate access, and it does encourage them to use the resources. They trust publisher sites, and they trust the content that we put out there. So I think, anecdotally, there are benefits. I think it does remove one barrier. I'm not trying to suggest that there aren't other challenges that we then need to address. So I haven't really answered that question either. But I suppose, there's lots of nuance in terms of both. But personally, I do think that openness and transparency and trust do go hand in hand, and they should be attributes that we promote, and that STM can help us to advance.
Thanks, Vicky. I think too, there clearly was an advantage in the early days of open access because you didn't have a lot of content that was open. But of course, as we move towards a larger and larger volume of the best research being open access or freely available in some form, that might start to dilute that. I would expect just logically that might start to dilute that advantage. But thank you so much. And you mentioned the OA dashboard and that being updated soon. And in fact, between when you and I spoke earlier today and this town hall now, I managed to check in with Lucy Durgis, who of course is doing the work on that. And it's all almost ready to go live. They're just double checking all of the data has been uploaded correctly and that there aren't any errors in the new text, because there's a slightly different story there than last time. Same trends, but we just want to be able to correctly reflect and comment on that. So do be looking out for that in the next week or two, I would say. So with that, I'll continue on the open topic, and we're now going to turn our attention to India. And as many of you will know, India had announced in 2020 their new draft policy STIP that is much more broad than just around open access, but really their whole science and technology and innovation policy. The official version of that has not yet been officially released. So although we are 3 years in, we're not yet still seeing the official version of that, but we do hear some information here and there about it. But one part of that was the one nation, one subscription element. And I learned from my Indian contacts that if you Google One Nation One, which I have done, you will see that many, many things, hundreds of things will come up. And that is because this is kind of a concept that India launched with the current government, that we would have one nation and one, all sorts of things. So One Nation, One subscription is just one manifestation of that. And indeed, what I've also heard is there's almost some competition between different agencies and different units to really be the unit that achieves their one nation, whatever it is that they're trying to create. So we had an announcement about One Nation, One subscription come out in a very short deadline of, I think at the time, like 4 months within which they thought that they would achieve this. And at least in some of our engagement, we tried to explain that even if we look to Germany with the Deal project, it took a couple of years, and that was a much smaller country, smaller population, smaller number of universities and institutions than India. We now know, though, that they had extended the deadline. And during the summer months, I say summer for those of us from the Northern Hemisphere, so over the last couple of months, a new RFI was issued. I don't know that all publishers have received that, but I have spoken with 5, 6, 7 who have received it. There are some challenging elements in that RFI, and obviously it will be up to each house how they approach it. But that is now ongoing. It doesn't specify, to our knowledge, what they want to do about, say, open access content. So they're still kind of focused on this notion of one nation, one subscription will give the entire nation access. So focused on the access and not open access as such for the whole world. We just today launched our new STM India chapter, and I'm really excited about that. We are now represented in India by Samir Puri, who has agreed to be STM's India consultant. And he has really done an analysis for me and recognized that the first focus needs to be, in terms of a strategy in India, needs to be about building a presence for STM in India, because we don't have that there. So we've brought together the publishing community, the chapter launched today, and we are really excited about that. So I got to get on the call this morning and say hello to everyone. And I know that they worked through thinking about how they want to take things forward. One of the parts of our work in India will also be to collaborate with the Association of Indian Publishers, AIP. AIP has many members, I think 14 or 15 that overlap with STM members. So it makes quite a lot of sense that we would work together and think about how do we engage with different stakeholders in India to share information, and to Vicky's point about how do we tell our story, how do we share correct information about what publishers do and how we do that work and why there is a cost. Because Samir shared with me this quote from a government official, and this goes to Vicky's point earlier too, about that we're seeing more and more questions being posed to us about why does this cost anything? And this particular government official said, the government feels that the publishing industry is not being transparent with costs. We feel you are charging us too much for it. The cost of research is borne by the government. Peer review is being done by our researchers, and the cost of tech to host has gone down. So what are you charging for? So this is part of our work on the ground in India, is really to try and build the case for it. This is why actually our services do cost money. So that is India for now, and we look to being able to provide you with more information as we develop things there. Samir is going to be presenting to the STM board at the October meeting in Frankfurt, our strategy for engagement there. And then I'll be able to share even more with all of you after that. So then turning attention to Japan, which is another country that came out with a somewhat surprising announcement this year. So as some of you might be aware, there was a G7 summit that was hosted by Japan in May. And in conjunction with that, the Japanese government announced their intention to move to immediate open access by 2025. When we speak to folks in Japan, they say this came as a bit of a surprise because culturally, Japan is a consensus culture, and it is not the usual thing for a government to make an announcement at a top level and then kind of work from top down, but rather things tend to bubble up, this type of a thing, and then practices are already developing, and then you have a policy about it. However, they did make this announcement, and the government is now working on a roadmap for how to achieve this. And they expect to publish that by the end of this year, so sometime in the fourth quarter. The STM Japan chapter met last week, and we had an opportunity to have Amane Koizumi, who is a professor in neuroscience, but is kind of the equivalent of, those of you who are calling in from the United States, sort of the head of the NIH. He's kind of that for Japan. And he has been tasked with building this roadmap. And he joined our Japan chapter and shared his thoughts about that roadmap and about the challenges that Japan is facing. And he did share that the government made this announcement, but really had no idea in practice, how do we actually get there? What is very good is that because STM has been active in Japan for quite some time, the chapter has been active, our members of the chapter have good contacts, Barbara Koluminos has been over many times, and Michael Mabe, as the earlier CEO of STM, was also quite in Japan. We do have a presence in Japan as STM. And Professor Koizumi said, we have got to be partners in thinking about how do we put in place a policy that ensures that authors have all of the options they need, and that we don't exclude different groups. So he's looking at an approach that's probably going to be somewhat flexible. He's saying that we think this is going to be a combination of green, a combination of APCs, so being able to support full OA journals and full OA publishers, as well as transformative agreements. But there are some challenges because in Japan, most researchers do not have monies for APCs. So he says right now, it's primarily the wealthier researchers that are able to afford gold open access. But equally, there hasn't been a schemata in place in order to negotiate transformative agreements. There is a new consortium that's being pulled together that they're calling Penguin. And I believe that when I visit at the end of October, beginning of November, I might have an opportunity to speak with that group. But again, what I think is very hopeful and is very unique here compared to some other areas of the world is that the individual who is tasked with working with this is very much interested in having a dialogue with us and with publishers. We did ask in this most recent presentation, Professor Koizumi referenced licensing, and he hadn't talked about that previously. And here he was talking about CC BY licenses being the preferred route, and also talking about the need for authors to retain their rights. And I did ask him, can you share with me, why do you think authors need to retain something? What is it that you think they don't have the right to do right now that you think they ought to have the right to do? And it was interesting because he said, gosh, that's a really good question. And he cited, well, we're hearing things like authors want to be able to reuse a figure that they published in an article, and they then have to ask permission. And I said, well, gosh, I actually think that most authors would have the right to reuse that figure, and that's not a problem. So I said, so he said, let's have a further conversation. I wouldn't mind talking about that. So I think sometimes it's about, if we can have that reasonable, rational conversation, we can also make it, more clear that actually there's some type of catchphrases that are being thrown around, and some assumptions being made without really trying to understand what is it we're truly trying to achieve here. Because I think if we work together, we can get there in a way that doesn't risk the sustainability of publishing and the options that authors have. So that is our situation in Japan. As I say, it's ever unfolding, and I will be visiting Japan myself at the end of October, beginning of November, with a number of meetings. And we're really excited to see how we can continue to engage there with all the support from our STM members on the ground. Yes, and just Mark Seeley is also reminding that there are STM guidelines and agreements signed by many publishers permitting academic reuse. And that's precisely the point, Mark. I think we're finding that there's so many myths out there. And if you're going to build this entire policy and even call for copyright reform just because you want authors to be able to reuse figures, gosh, that's a whole lot of work for something that actually maybe they already have the right to do. So I think that's why it's so important for us to be able to have those conversations with those who are looking to develop policies. So with that, we've run 45 minutes. So I do want to just open the floor. Thank you to Mark for already adding questions, but if anyone else has some questions they'd like to ask, and it can be about things we've talked about, but it can also be about other things that you're wondering, about that is the point of these town halls, is to give everybody an opportunity to come and to meet with us. I'll just open up the floor and see if anybody had any questions. We're such a small group here today too, so if anybody wanted to open a microphone, I'm sure we can do that too. Anyone have questions? There is one thing I was just remembering that I forgot to mention about Japan that might also give those on the call some indication of some direction. They are quite interested in how deal was worked out in Germany. And so that is sort of an example that they're digging into and wanting to understand better, and think might be something that they could look to emulate in Japan, more so than some of the solutions in the United States right now. So we just take that as a bit of a direction of travel. I don't see any further questions coming in, Vicky. So I'm just going to ask one more time to make sure that I'm not closing down before someone had a chance to ask something. No, I don't think so. Well, in that case, I just want to thank everyone for having taken some time this afternoon, this evening, this morning, whatever time it is for you, to join us. And I also in particular want to thank Vicky Gardner for joining me. Vicky is one of those examples of how dedicated our members are. Vicky, you've got your hand up, so do let me give you a last. And I also saw that Mark put up his hand, so let me have you speak, Vicky, and then I'll unmute Mark as well before everyone leaves here. Great.
Thank you, Caroline. I was actually just putting my hand up because there is a question in the Q&A from my colleague James, actually, which is an interesting question. So, is the conversation around book publishing brought up when STM speaks to funders and so on? So I wondered if you might be able to speak to that.
That's a really good question. Apologies that I missed the Q&A. So yes, sometimes, but sometimes not. So it really varies by the country, by the funder. And as you'll know, there are some funders and some regions that are now beginning. So in Europe, there's attention being turned to monographs. We expect, for example, now also in the UK, we're having a very high level discussion myself together with the PA and ALPS with UKRI shortly. And we expect that there'll be something around the monographs being raised there. In Japan, for the moment, they are not talking about monographs. This is only about journal articles. And I believe equally the One Nation, One Subscription for India is just about journal articles. So thank you for asking that question. And as I said, I think I saw that Mark was putting up his hand, and I'm just going to give him that opportunity to unmute if he's able to. I'm not sure. Joe, are participants able to unmute themselves?
Yes, Mark should be able to talk, yeah.
I just meant to say thank you for the information. Very, very useful. That's all.
Oh, thank you, Mark. That was nice. Thank you so much. Great. Am I missing any? Let me just double check. Here's another one in the Q&A. Let me make sure that I'm not missing any other questions.
I think the second question was just a thank you.
Yeah, I see that now. Terrific. Okay. Well, again, I just want to compliment you, Vicky, and everyone who volunteers their time. As you said, it's so valuable. And this week I sat in on a couple of different committee meetings, and I thought, my goodness, how wonderful this is, that this really is a community that comes together, rolls up their sleeves, and is really willing to take on some really tough challenges, and with such a positive approach to things. So I truly thank you for joining me today, Vicky. I thank your committee and also everyone else. Thank you to everyone who joined today. And as Vicky mentioned, there's lots of ways now in our new structure that our member organizations are provided with spaces to come and, share their own thoughts and input. And we do welcome you to do so. So thank you for that. And have a good rest of the day, evening, morning, wherever you are in your time zone. And we look forward to speaking with you again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.